Hiya, welcome back to my channel. I had planned originally on taking the summer off of school. I figured I'd work on my channel some, but other than that, I wouldn't do, historical reading. I wouldn't do my research. I would instead work on, hobbies. Do whatever it is that people do when they have free time. I'm not entirely sure what that is, but, do some sewing, do some crocheting, do projects with my kids, enjoy my summer. Inevitably, my brain wouldn't shut off, so I've spent half the summer researching anyway. I officially start the fall semester next week, and with that, I officially start my master's thesis. But in reality, I've been working on my master's thesis all summer. I already have a ton of research, a list of, sources I'm going through. I can't stop. And part of my brain working that way is that sometimes I get these topics stuck in my head that just will not let me go until I actually put it out there and I talk about that. I'm sure you've all experienced that sometime in your lives, with other things where there's something really irritating you and, maybe you need to talk to your friend or your spouse or your, whatever and get it off your chest before you can let it go. And for me, that's kind of how I am with research. It gets a hold of me. And part of what this video boils down to is that historians have a responsibility to be as objective as possible. And I say that knowing that, as humans, we all are biased. No matter, how hard we try, no matter what we tell ourselves or what we tell other people, we all have our own biases. And I know that. But that just means that we have to be careful and critical, right? We have to ask hard questions and make sure we're not just finding what we want to find. I'm at the point in grad school where I absolutely cringe when I have to put together a research proposal because inevitably, at least in my school, they'll ask for a kind of a working thesis statement. So, you're not locked in. You're allowed to change your mind, but they just want you to put out there what you think you're going to find. And it drives me nuts because as far as I'm concerned, that's not possible. I can have a topic that I want to learn about. I can know some specific stuff that, I'm wondering about it, but my brain refuses to put together an actual working thesis because to me that's jumping the gun. In one of my previous research proposals last spring, I actually put in there, quote, David Hackett Fisher wrote that historical research should begin not with a thesis or a theory or an ideology, but with a set of open questions. This research will follow that model, researching first and concluding after, end quote. Luckily, my professor was awesome. He understood what I was saying. I, provided enough of, my questions and detail on what I'd be researching that he was cool with it. But it's a sticking point for me. It drives me nuts. And if you haven't figured out, I'm going to be ranting a lot today. I'm sorry. I'll try to edit some of it out, but it is what it is today. This isn't like doing a science experiment where, when you're a kid, you enter the science fair and you're like, I think I'm going to try this and it's going to do this and this, and this. And then either your experiment works or it doesn't work and you just explain what happened. Granted, there's a lot of junk science out there, so I'm not even saying that's foolproof. But a lot of times when you have a discipline like history, it is really easy. Rather seductive, really. Just this desire to find evidence supporting what you want to find, and you just kind of ignore that there might be other stuff out there. I'm not saying I do this. I try very, very hard not to do this. I'm not pointing to anyone specific out there and saying they do it. I'm saying that the temptation is there, that it's easy. Because if you can find 10, 20, 30, however many sources that back up what you want to say, it's not as obvious that you're ignoring the other however many sources, as long as you can make it look well researched. That's part of why in these videos, down in the description box, if you haven't seen it before, I always put a bibliography, as if I was writing a academic paper, to let you know exactly where I'm getting this stuff from, so you can see the type of sources I use. You can look at them, or you can go look at other things, decide for yourself. I mean, that's really what it should be. I don't want you to watch these videos, and because some person on YouTube told you this, you automatically believe it. That's part of what I think is an issue with history, is that too many people have accepted what they've been told. So don't do that. I feel like my videos, in a way, should have a big, giant, flaming asterisk with a note that, based on information I've found so far, because it is subject to change. History is always subject to change. And there are people who think that, we know everything there is to know about history, that if our assessment of, what history was, how it happened, why it happened, if that changes, that we're just trying to change history. But that's not the case. There's still a lot we don't know. There's a lot of questions that have not been asked. And heaven forbid we find new evidence. Maybe there is a source that nobody had gone through, some letters or a diary or something that nobody considered. Heaven forbid we review that and take that into account, right? Because history, it's a theory. It's a lot of theories. It is not this unchangeable thing that we all have to just, kind of look at and accept but never question. In my childhood, I believed a lot of bad history. As have we all, I think. And as I've gotten older and I've researched more, I've, had more sources available to me. I've learned more about finding sources. A lot of my opinions have changed as I found new information. I mean, that extends beyond just my perception of history, but that's a whole other conversation. I do have opinions when it comes to the topic of this video, the Black Regiment, and I'm not even gonna hide that. I'm not even, most of my videos, I try to be very just kind of direct. This is not my opinion. This is what I found. This is what I think it shows, whatever. Today I have opinions and I'm going to share them, but I will try to make it clear what's my opinion and what is, the facts that I found, so you can make your own assessment of the facts. But anyway, not long ago, I found out about a book titled Bringing Back the Black Regiment. And I was kind of scratching my head for a lot of reasons. But possibly for me, the biggest reason I was scratching my head was because I actually had heard the term Black Regiment before in the context of clergy, which is what this book was talking about. I encountered it when I was researching Mather Biles. I will put a link up here because I have shared some of my research there. There's also an organization that uses the term Black Robed Regiment. And this organization is pushing for modern day clergy to basically step into the shoes of these historical clergy, and what this organization is asserting was the role of the Black Regiment in history, and the things that they're claiming about it. That's really all I want to say about these people and these groups, because I'm not trying to give them, more publicity and a bigger platform for what they're saying. If you really want to know more about them, I'm sure Google will bring it up for you. That's not what this video is. Black Robed Regiment, or Black Robe Regiment, is a new term. It is a term used to try to dress up history that isn't nearly as romantic or idealized as they're portraying it. In historical sources, it is simply Black Regiment. That's it. I have not found any historical mention of Black Robed Regiment anywhere, ever, not once. So why have people in the modern day kind of modified this term? I don't know. I suspect that Black Robed Regiment maybe sounds better to them in some way. Maybe it sounds like more of a compliment. Maybe it sounds, more specific to the clergy, and maybe they're concerned that Black Regiment could be misconstrued to refer to, regiments of soldiers that was comprised of men of color. I don't know. But you can't make stuff up. Or you can, but I take issue with it, as I am in this video, because it's not, you're creating a whole new thing. This is not history. And if you were just making this term up for clarity, and that's all, and you're not trying to pass it off as a historical thing, then say that. But that's not what these people are doing. They are specifically implying that this term was used historically, frequently, and that it was used to convey what they're saying. It was not. First, before I continue, I've already said a lot, but before I continue further, we need to cover the fact that the clergy, the idea of them being involved in politics was nothing new. I don't know who would attempt to claim that. Nobody in their right mind. The entire history of New England is full of clergymen having a very important standing in society, having a lot of power, having a lot of influence. So let's not sit here and pretend that any clergyman being involved in the politics of the American Revolution is an anomaly, because it's not. And, never mind the influence of religious leaders and clergymen in world history, outside of New England. And I say New England, I'm talking about the colonies overall, but New England is where this is like a bigger thing. So, specifically New England, but yeah, the behavior was elsewhere too. But it's not like the American Revolution was just so justified and so exceptional that these clergymen just cast off their typical neutral stances and behavior due to an extraordinary situation. Let's not pretend that, because that's not even remotely the case. And oh my Lord, if you know of anyone trying to claim that, please send that to me, comment, send me a message on Instagram or something so that I can see it. I'm not sure if I will be banging my head against a wall, wanting to have an alcoholic beverage, which I only do once in a blue moon. Maybe I'll scream. I don't know. Maybe I'll laugh. Share it with me anyway. I only say all this because I'm hoping that everyone knows this and that it's a given and there's no one out there trying to claim otherwise. But you never know. So I'm just going to say it anyway. In our history, the influence of the church or churches was always acceptable when it was the right church and intolerable when it was the wrong one. One of these so-called intolerable acts from our colonial history that led to the revolution was the Quebec Act of 1774. And this upset the colonists, especially the clergy, because they thought it might mean the Anglican Church would have more influence, more control in the colonies. They thought there was going to be an Anglican bishop, specifically in the colonies. But religion, in one shape or another, has always been influential. Duh. But this was especially true in New England, where Van Tyne, I don't know, it's in the Bibliography, but he writes it was customary to have a sermon as part of local elections. You would have a sermon, and then later everyone would decide how they would vote. So maybe this is a general sermon. Maybe the clergyman decided that he was going to push the population in a particular direction. Either way, it was very entwined. And Gifford describes how the clergy were instrumental in recruiting colonists to fight during the French and Indian War. So again, this is nothing new under the sun. I'm certainly not sitting here trying to claim that, there were no clergymen active in the war that had an impact or whatever else. Not at all the direction I'm going. So, was the clergy influential in the colonies? Yes. Was religion influential in the colonies? Yeah. But was the Black Regiment that is referred to in historical sources and in the context of the American Revolution, was that something completely out of the ordinary? No. Was it something to be revered from our history? Like, something, if you're going to look back on our history, this is something you look at and you just are particularly proud of this? That's up to you. In this context, the Black Regiment refers to clergymen who use their pulpits to push a particular political stance during the period, leading up to the Revolution. Again, I mentioned that when it comes to Mather Byles, because he was the exception. He was a loyalist pastor in Boston, and he was the exception in that he didn't preach politics in the pulpit. So the Black Regiment, when the term was used, it wasn't like they were saying that this is new, this is unusual, this is anything else. It was just an easy term to get across. Oh, those clergy over there, this is what they're doing right now. This is who they're siding with. In a lot of these, it seems to be almost a derogatory thing where, rather than being like, oh, this particular person or the clergyman, like, they're saying it in that way because it's not a compliment. But it's not even said that many times, which I'm getting to. I know, slowly, but I'm getting there. So it wasn't an organization, it was like a collective term just for a mindset. And the following examples that I'm going to get into, they are not chronological. I will give you the dates, but just up front, they're not chronological. They're just kind of in order of interest to me and how I think it fits in this discussion. The loyalist and British official Peter Oliver is probably the main person who used the term. In his Origin and Progress of the American Rebellion, which was not even published, I think, until like the mid-20th century, it referred to the Black Regiment as, quote, Mr. Otis's Black Regiment, the dissenting clergy who took so active a part in the rebellion, end quote. Included in this discussion, Oliver specifically lists Dr. Charles Chauncey, Dr. Jonathan Mayhew, and Dr. Samuel Cooper, all from Boston. There were more, though. They weren't all in Boston itself. It just, it makes sense. Just as the colonists in general were torn on the idea of independence, torn on how to respond to what they see as abuses of, the crown and the British government against them, it makes sense that the clergy, as colonists, would also be divided. This is not confusing or unusual or surprising. You can hear my kittens in the background. Anyway, the thing is, no matter your opinion of the American Revolution in general, the end does not justify the means. This is any time in history. The end does not justify the means. We can't just say, oh, this war was great because the outcome was great, so we're just not going to study what led to that outcome. As historians, we have to examine those means that were used for that outcome. Earl Percy wrote in 1774 that the Massachusetts clergy, quote, preach up sedition openly from their pulpits. Nay, some of them have gone so far as absolutely to refuse the sacrament to the communicants, till they have signed a paper of the most seditious kind, which they have denominated the Solemn League and Covenant, end quote. So, these clergymen, they refuse the sacrament to their parishioners unless they agreed to a non-importation agreement. Basically, they're holding the concept of eternal life over these individuals' heads unless, in exchange for cooperation with the Black Regiment's political goals, trying to boycott British goods. How Christian. And this is where I'm not going to pretend I don't have an opinion, because I do. I think that is flat out wrong. I think it is manipulative. I think it is an abuse of power. I think they had every right to have their own political opinions, absolutely. But when you look at our past, you look at how much power religion has over people, has over their behavior, even in the modern day, but especially in the past, it's not unreasonable to say that these parishioners probably felt like they had no choice, that their, salvation was on the line, that they had to agree with this. So it makes me wonder how many people would not have agreed to the Solemn League and Covenant if they hadn't felt like they were being blackmailed. I don't understand idolizing a group, the Black Regiment. I don't understand idolizing them for such methods. And I'm not saying every liberty-minded clergyman of that period used such methods. I'm not saying that at all. I don't think that's the case. But I'm saying that it is used, and that the clergymen who used it are probably the ones that were being referred to when Black Regiment was used. So again, it goes back to, is this a term that you want to look back on with pride? Back in 1768, on July 25th, the Boston Gazette published a piece written as a dialogue between a pensioner and a divine, as the piece calls these people. And it isn't credited to any particular author, so all I can really say is that clearly people were of, differing opinions at the time, and the newspaper thought that this piece would be beneficial to print, that it represented a lot of what was going on. And it was also republished in at least one paper. I found the New Hampshire Gazette on August 5th of 1768. For all I know, Peter Oliver could have written this piece, and maybe he's one of the only people who ever used the term Black Regiment. I don't know. We don't know. But in this piece, the pensioner says, quote, "It seems to me that the clergy interest themselves too much in a political dispute of the day. The gentlemen in crape have no right to intermeddle in such things. But Otis says he would not carry his point without the aid of the Black Regiment," end quote. So basically, one side is claiming James Otis Jr. would not be successful politically unless he was getting support from the clergy. Maybe a lot of the clergy, maybe a vocal few, but one way or the other, it's noticeable and it's being remarked on. The divine responds by questioning whether Otis said any such thing, and says, quote, "Surely you will allow this to be a day of darkness and difficulty, and you will also allow us to pray for light and direction," end quote. Seems reasonable. But then the pensioner says, quote, "The clergy are preaching upon politics when all manner of licentiousness prevails unnoticed. People steal and lie and cheat and swear and get drunk and run into riots, and there is no preaching against these vices. Here was a riot in Boston but Friday night, and nobody takes notice of it," end quote. There's more to the piece than that, but this is the real gist for the sake of this conversation. This was printed in the Boston Gazette on a Monday, and the pensioner says that the riot was on Friday, so presumably this was probably written after the day before, the Sunday passed, with none of the clergymen speaking against the violence and the other sins. So I found that really interesting, because I think it kind of reflects both sides of the conversation that were probably going on at the time. Also, before I move on, I'll direct your attention back real quick to the pensioner referring to the divine and his like as the gentleman in crape. At first, I thought crape was just like, one of those creative spellings of the past before we decided, hey, everyone in the US is going to spell it like this, everyone in Britain's going to spell it like this, and that's it. But apparently it actually was spelt C-R-A-P-E, and the rather fantastic A New English Dictionary on Historical Principles list one of the meanings as, quote, "In the 18th century, a sort of thin worsted stuff of which the dress of the clergy is sometimes made," end quote. And it specifically connects referring to someone dressed in crape as meaning a clergyman. I found that interesting anyway, so I'm thinking, Black Regiment is probably one of many, many euphemisms they could have used in referring to the clergyman. think gentleman in crepe has an interesting ring to it. But anyway, back on topic. So the pensioner referring to the clergy not preaching against riots, it brings up another situation related to the clergy. Because when Hutchinson's house was destroyed by the mob in Boston, one of the ringleaders specifically attributed his actions to having been inspired by a sermon he had just heard by Reverend Jonathan Mayhew, one of the Black Regiment. Maybe this guy just didn't want to take responsibility. Or maybe there was something about what was going on and what was being said at the pulpit. I don't know. Continuing, there is the Boston Gazette from December 7th of 1772. And this is signed with the pseudonym Israelite. And kind of more interesting is that it was actually published first in London, not in the colonies. The article targets Thomas Hutchinson, and it says that he, quote, had once the greatest part of the dissenting clergy of New England, and some here very much devoted to him. The Black Regiment, as he of late terms them, was his main support. There was no doing without the Black Regiment, which he for many years headed, in bitter opposition to the ease and prosperity of the Church of England in that part of the world. End quote. And it goes on to assert that, the clergy would be mortified when they learned more about Hutchinson and learned how he had misled them. Interestingly, it was around the same time that this was published that Benjamin Franklin got his hands on some official, some letters that had been sent to Britain. And in the next year, in 1773, that's when Hutchinson's letters would be published in the colonies. And, everyone would get all offended. So, was Israelite someone who knew about the letters? Was Israelite someone who purposely wanted to use a term that otherwise I have only really seen attributed to Peter Oliver? I don't know. But finally, on January 11th of 1776, Peter Oliver's an address to the soldiers of Massachusetts Bay who are now in arms against the laws of their country was published in the Boston Newsletter. And in it, Oliver says, quote, he said that it was necessary to enlist a Black Regiment in their service. The bait was snapped at, and many ministers of the gospel too many for the honor of the Christian religion, joined the cry. End quote. If I had to guess, I'm guessing the he's referring to is James Otis Jr. again. But when I read through it, it might have just been how I was reading it. I couldn't tell for sure because I don't think he specifically said. It was just implied. But again, it goes back to, of the very few mentions we have historically of a Black regiment, the only one that I know for certainty used it was Peter Oliver. And I'm really not sure one person really is. I don't think one person saying something is enough to justify using it as if it was this huge big thing in the period. I know one of these quotes I provided, I think Israelite referred to Hutchinson as having said it, but I haven't found any evidence of Hutchinson saying it. So I don't know if they were confused, like they forgot that it was actually Oliver who'd said it, or maybe there were multiple people who had said it, but at the end of the day, going through, databases of old newspapers and stuff, I can't find any more mentions than this. After filming this video, I realized there was one more newspaper mention that I forgot to list, and I thought it was interesting enough to go back and add in. On January 30th of 1775, the Boston Postboy and Advertiser has a section with the header "To the Public." In it, the author refers to the work of the Junto, a political group including men like Sam Adams, and then says, quote, "What methods were taken for seducing from their duty to their professed lord and master, and enlisting into their service what they were pleased to call the Black Regiment, what bad effects that enlistment and the indefatigable pains taken by those new proselytes had upon the populace." End quote. At the end, it says, quote, "Any intelligence of the foregoing kind directed to A.F. and left at the printer's will be very gratefully received and published." End quote. From reading the rest of it, you can tell that this was written from the loyalist / Tory, whatever you want to call them, perspective. So I think it's actually really interesting in a way, because it's the first time I see it implied that the, liberty-minded group is referring to these clergymen as the Black Regiment. Otherwise, you really only see loyalists use that term. So if anything, if anything, this is the only quote at all to back up the idea of the Black Regiment as a compliment, and really, in the end, it's not even complimenting them either. And if you come across more, please share in the comments. I would love to see it. But, it's certainly far less historical mentions than is being implied. And I'm sure I could find the Black Regiment talked about in modern history books, way, way more times than it was even used in the past. And unfortunately, some people choosing to use this term or modify this term and then exaggerating the term tends to result in even modern historians mistakenly, thinking there's more to it than it is, just accepting it because they keep hearing it. And this isn't, just like a slippery slope fallacy, because in the research I've done for other historical topics, I have found on more than one occasion something that is inaccurate, that historians have regurgitated over and over and over. They clearly didn't look into, they just do kind of like a 1 or 2 sentence reference to it, where they've just accepted what they always heard, and what they always heard was wrong. So are we now here in the present day going to create yet another inaccuracy to be further propagated by historians of the future? I really don't want to see that. I don't think it contributes to the discipline. I don't think it contributes to our understanding of the past. Rather, it confuses things. So yes, I am biased. I don't like this. I have opinions. But, I'll put it to you. What do you think is the significance of the term Black Regiment? What do you think is the takeaway from that term? Is it just another phrase like gentleman in crape that's not significant? Any more so than just talking about the clergymen in general would be significant. Because it's not like, it's not like this was Dumbledore's army where everyone signed a little piece of paper saying they're part of it. They didn't sign up to be Black Regiment. They signed up to be clergymen. And clergymen as humans had opinions. But we don't have something where they decide, oh, yep, I'm going to sign up for the Black Regiment because I agree with this and this is what I want to do with my pulpit. So some of them were probably more extreme. Some of them were probably quite liberty-minded but didn't want to use their pulpit quite in such a manipulative way. Some of them are loyalists. There's all different types. But let's not make something out of it that isn't there. And certainly don't say, let's sign up for a modern-day black-robed regiment, just like these people of the past. The people of the past didn't sign up for anything. Anyway, sorry, I know. Like I said, ranting. I warned y'all. Might have been halfway through the video, but I warned y'all. But what do you think? Do you think that there is more significance here than I seem to imply? Do you think that it is fair to use Black Regiment as if these clergymen had, signed up for something and specifically set themselves apart? Or should we just say, hey, yeah, religion and the clergymen, they played a part too, just like everyone else. Yes, we're going to acknowledge the part they played, we're going to study the part they played, but we're not going to exaggerate it. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. Maybe even hit that bell so they actually notify you. And I will see you in the next video. Thanks, y'all.